Joining us now, NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC News senior policy reporter Shannon Pettypiece, and Neil Irwin, chief economic correspondent at Axios. Okay, Shannon, let me start with you. A ton of economic news this morning. This jobs report, a big pullback from employers. What's the top line here?
Yeah, I mean, a real slowdown in the job market, and it makes the job market look increasingly shaky. I mean, we've been hearing from employers for a while that they had hiring freezes in place, that they just weren't going to add new employees because of all the uncertainty, whether it was about tariffs, maybe the uncertainty about what was ahead for AI, uncertainty about this tax bill that was coming, or just the fact that they really hired a lot of workers over the past few years, and now, they were starting at the point of hitting the brakes. But for workers, what it means is that essentially, if you have a job, you're probably in an okay position right now. The unemployment rate's still relatively low. Wages are kind of going up. But if you're someone who's trying to get your foot in the door in the job market, and I've been talking to a lot of recent grads lately about this, you're going to be struggling because the employers are just not adding jobs at the pace they were a few years ago. And we're really seeing the lowest pace of hiring since the start of the pandemic, really.
Garrett, you just got some reaction from the White House this morning. What are they saying?
Yeah, that's right. Well, there have been some White House advisors on the air this morning saying that, obviously these numbers aren't great. The White House's official statement on the numbers largely doesn't talk about the numbers. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt putting out a statement that reads, inflation has cooled, wages have increased, unemployment is stable, and the private sector is growing. Goes on to talk about the idea of new jobs going to American citizens as opposed to foreign-born workers, and then talks about tariffs raking in billions of dollars to make the country wealthy again, concluding with a call for Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. So the White House's, I think, broad stance on here is pretty clear. They believe the economy is healthy. They believe overall their policies are working. And they are trying to not talk about the specifics of this data, especially the revisions to past months, which they've argued are mostly on technical and don't reflect the health of the economy.
Yeah, let me pick up on that, Neil, because it wasn't just this month that the numbers are weaker than expected, but there was the big downward revisions for May and June as well. How significant is that?
It's huge. Look, these numbers, they basically flatlined this summer. When you're only adding 35,000 jobs a month, which is what we've had the last 3 months, that's the same as kind of being in neutral. That's the weakest in the non-pandemic months since 2010. That's just not the kind of job growth you see in a healthy economy. That said, one thing we don't know the answer to is how much of that is labor demand versus labor supply. So if you have deportations, immigrants being sent out of the country, or immigrants who are afraid to go to work because of raids, that could be lowering labor supply. So it might not just be that employers aren't looking to hire.
Stocks are also down this morning on this news. We've seen a lot of resilience on Wall Street recently, brushing off the tough economic news and the tariff threats and the back and forth in the last few months. Neil, is this different?
It does feel different. This is the first hard data we've seen that suggests real economic weakening. We've seen survey data over the last few months that suggested worries and fears out there, but this is more real, and this is something that suggests there is a meaningful slowdown happening in the economy. I wonder if the Federal Reserve, which left interest rates steady 2 days ago, if they had this number in hand, if they might have done something a little differently. Already there were a couple of dissenters saying they wanted to cut rates a couple of days ago. Now it looks like they probably will cut rates in September.
And of course, the jobs numbers come just on the heels of some big changes in the president's tariff plan. So, Shannon, which countries, which rates, what are you tracking in this moment in terms of what's going to impact American consumers?
Yeah, I mean, companies, if these tariffs do end up going into effect and being collected, which they're now scheduled to next week, but I will caveat, we have seen these deadlines come and go, and we've pushed back a number of times. But if these tariffs are collected, U.S. companies importing goods, whether they're a manufacturing company importing parts and materials, they're a retailer importing, clothes and shoes they're going to sell to consumers, they are now going to be faced with billions of dollars more in tariff charges that they have to pay when those goods come into the country. Those companies are going to have a choice. Do they try to absorb those costs and cut costs elsewhere? And to get back to the issue of the labor market, if you're a company and you need to cut costs, one of your biggest line items is usually labor. Yep. So do you try and trim labor or put in a hiring freeze to try and absorb some of those costs so you don't pass them on to consumers. If you do pass them on to consumers, then what does that mean? If you have a consumer who's already nervous about their job or maybe out of work or seeing their hours cut, are they going to be able to buy your products if they go up? Or then you get this cycle of people cutting back on buying, which then in turn is going to cause the employer to have to cut back on their labor costs in another way. So these tariffs coming at a time when we're already seeing this softening in the labor market could really be detrimental and damaging to a lot of companies, consumers, and workers.
You know, Neil, it is so hard to keep track of all these different tariff numbers and announcements. Some countries have seen rates go down, others have actually seen rates go up even since that April announcement. There are lots of carve-outs for specific goods. There are still delays for certain countries. Brazil's got such a high rate because President Trump doesn't like how their former president is being treated. Is there any consistency, or is chaos the point?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of hope on Wall Street that we're going to see a more steady, yes, a higher tariff regime, but a steadier high tariff regime in the months ahead. It hasn't happened yet. I mean, even the tax collection, the Border Patrol tax collectors are confused because we're not collecting as much money as the estimates say we should be, apparently because a lot of the enforcement stuff is really tricky when the rules and laws are changing every day and you don't even know what goods from what countries should face what rate. So it really is a messy situation right now. I think it's challenging for the ports. It's challenging for importers, for exporters. So that said, you know, if we might have more stability in the months ahead. That is a kind of confidence building thing on Wall Street, even if those are much higher tariffs than anybody expected this time a few months ago.
Garrett, NBC News spoke to swing state voters who backed President Trump in November but are now anxious about his economic moves. 82-year-old Janice Dunn from North Carolina told NBC, quote, he said he was going to get gas down. He was going to get groceries down. Now he put tariffs on half the stuff we buy, and things are going up, up, up. I feel like a lot of his plans are backfiring. Garrett, are these concerns breaking through to the Trump team?
The short answer is no, Anna. The White House is supremely confident in their economic plans. I spoke to the president last night for a story about the tariffs. He believes that they're working exactly as intended, and he's going to stick to his guns. I think the White House would point to some of the projects they're doing to develop energy reserves and resources around the country as things that might still pay dividends. But the idea that this president, who has run on this economic plan for essentially 3 presidential election cycles now, is going to change course, I think is unlikely at this point, Anna.
Neil, as Garrett mentioned just last night, NBC News spoke with the president, and he was boasting about the revenue that he's generated from these tariffs so far, $26 billion in June, according to the Treasury Department. How does that compare to earlier estimates? Can you put that into perspective for us? And who's paying that $26 billion to the government? Is it the country shipping the goods or ultimately the Americans buying them?
Yeah, so this is real money. So there's no question that the tariffs are raising and will keep raising more money than most people were forecasting a few months ago. That's helpful on the deficit. So that's helpful in terms of the longer term fiscal trajectory of the U.S. At the same time, this is very uncertain revenue. As we were just been talking about, the rates are changing every day. It seems like, we had a court challenge, an appeals court thing yesterday to see whether this is even legal, whether these tariffs are legal under this emergency authority the president's using. So how lasting this revenue will turn out to be is an open question. And on the question of who's actually paying it, I think it's still a mix. Clearly exporters are taking some of this in terms of lower profit margins. However, U.S. importers are taking profit margin hits as well. And we have started to see this show up in consumer prices. The June data just started to show it. July data we're going to start to get in the next few weeks. That I think is going to show some evidence that this is starting to creep into consumer prices and inflation.
Yeah, that data point this week, 2.6% inflation. We know that Fed and economists want to see it at 2%. It's going the wrong direction now. Thank you so much, Neil Irwin, Garrett Haake, and Shannon Pettypiece. Appreciate you all.